engine and the strong back will retract away from the vehicle.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see those clamps on the top of the structure there, just under the Dragon's trunk, which you can identify by the black solar panels on the left of the base of the capsule itself and to the right. And then the structure itself will lean about 2 degrees, and then it will retract the rest of the way once Dragon actually hits that T0 mark and lifts off. We're seeing those clamps being undone now. The 2 degree lean will be very subtle, and then you'll see it more when we hit that T0 mark.
That's right. At liftoff, Falcon 9 the TE will actually retract to 45 degrees to clear the way for Falcon 9. That TE is basically what has the umbilicals that attach to the vehicle that provide power, telemetry, and fluids prior to liftoff.
Now coming up in 10 seconds, we'll be listening for a call on stage 1 liquid oxygen load being complete.
Dragon is in terminal count and on internal power.
Minus 2 minutes, 30
This
seconds.
is the LD on countdown 1. Hold, hold, hold. We are standing down due to a T-tab ground issue.
As you just heard, we have a hold tonight due to the T-tab issue that I mentioned prior, and the
Dragon SpaceX with that call from LD. You are go to step into 5.100 launch scrub.
5.100 launch scrub. That's in work.
As with everything else, we are prepared for all scenarios, including, unfortunately, as we've seen tonight, a scrub. So the teams are now stepping into those procedures.
That's right. Again, it was the teams were tracking a ground issue with T-tab. That's the ignition fluid that actually sparks with the oxidizer and allows the engines to fire. The teams were tracking this issue. And so we're in a nominal scrub configuration. We'll start to see sort of a sequence of reversing some of the milestones we've been tracking as part of this countdown until the crew access arm swings back to the side hatch. And so the crew can egress the vehicle as part of a nominal launch scrub.
So for those of you just joining at about just under T minus 2.5 minutes, we unfortunately had a scrub due to a T-tab issue with the ground systems. So as Gary mentioned, we are in a nominal scrub configuration. There we have our procedures now being enacted to basically reverse all the progress that we made this evening, including propellant offload and bringing that crew access arm back into position and getting the astronauts out. Up until that point, everything was looking good. The ground team had reported that issue. I believe it was around T minus 5 minutes. At this point in time, the launch escape system is still armed, with the crew continuing to look comfortable there inside Dragon Endeavour.
And Dragon, LD on countdown 1. At this time, our offloads are underway. Vehicle is safe and proceeding nominally with offload. Expecting about a 50-minute offload.
SpaceX Dragon copy is about a 50-minute offload. So we'll be sitting here waiting for this.
So it will be a very methodical process to offload the Falcon 9 with the propellant and oxidizer. You can see some of that oxygen billowing off still. That'll be part of the sequence. They've also re-enabled auxiliary power by umbilical to the Dragon as they work their way through the nominal scrub timeline. Again, that's a 50-minute offload. For those, again, that are joining, we are in a scrub situation just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds from launch. Teams declared a scrub due to tracking a ground issue with TTEB. This is the ignition fluid that's used for the first and second stages that ignites the oxidizer for igniting the engines themselves to lift Dragon and into space. They were tracking this issue and declared a scrub again at the 2-minute 30-second mark. So we're going through a nominal scrub with a 50-minute fuel offload. You can see the strong back clamps have been re-enabled in this view right here. After we offload prop, we'll see the crew access arm swing back to get the crew out. In the meantime, the launch escape system, which enables the Supro Dracos to fire should there be any anomaly with the Falcon 9 during the offload procedure. The crew does have the ability to perform a pad abort. Right now, the ground teams are tracking no issues, everything going according to plan for a nominal scrub. All right, for those who are just joining, as a reminder, we are in a scrub at just under 2 minutes, 30 seconds, ground issue with the TTEB ignition fluid. And as a precaution, made a scrub for today's launch as we were counting down to T0. Now we're working our way through nominal scrub procedures, which include offloading the fuel and oxidizer that are loaded on the Falcon 9 right now. You can see we made our way through the countdown to a strong back retract that has been put back into place, and the clamps just under the trunk of Dragon are now in their configuration that they were prior to that part of the countdown. And Kate, we're making our way through offloading that Falcon 9.
That's right. In total, that prop offload is expected to take 50 minutes, 50. So unfortunately, at this point in time, there's not a whole lot that the crew there can do except patiently wait. I could imagine that they might be a little sad as of because otherwise they would be in space at this point, effectively. But right now, as you can see, they are just sitting back and relaxing as the Falcon 9 teams on the ground continue to keep them updated. As Gary said, this is a nominal scrub procedure or configuration. We have procedures listing out every step of this. So right now we are basically unfueling Falcon 9 from both the first and second stages, as Falcon 9 was nearly fully loaded at the time of the scrub. So as this continues, we will see some puffs of white clouds like you just saw there live, as that detanking effectively is underway. We will also see the crew access arm go back into the service position. That will enable the basically the pad team to re-enter the pad, go back up, and help the 4 astronauts that are currently there in the capsule basically unbuckle and get out of the capsule and make their way back down to the ground.
And it is going to be a methodical process. Like you said, Kate, through the fueling that began at T-minus 35 minutes, we made our way quite a bit through the timeline, and those tanks were pretty full. So the ground teams estimated a 50-minute offload of that fuel. In the meantime, the Crew 6 astronauts are in a passive state. They'll be tracking the fuel offloading process and listening to the communications from the ground teams, giving them status updates along the way. But we are in a nominal configuration. In the meantime, they've taken the Dragon Falcon 9 off of internal power and re-enabled auxiliary power back into the vehicle as they continue to go through this process. And like you said, Kate, it'll be a little bit, and then we'll see that crew access arm swing back, and they'll re-access the side hatch. If you were following along on our coverage, they walk down the crew access arm and enter the Dragon through that side hatch. They'll be exiting the same way. In the meantime, through this whole process, the crew and the Dragon itself will remain with the LES, the launch escape system, armed. So if in any event something were to happen as part of the offloading process, they'll be able to escape using the Super Draco engines, the 8 Super Dracos that are on the Dragon. It'll be a paddleboard over into the Atlantic Ocean. But for now, all the ground teams are tracking that everything is nominal. The fuel offload is going as planned as part of a normal scrub, and we're just continuing to follow along.
That's right. And one thing I want to mention, although this is not what we had hoped to happen today, and while we said that this is a nominal abort configuration, technically the crew and the launch teams have already practiced this very similar scenario. On Thursday, February 23rd, the integrated launch operations teams, along with the astronauts, performed a full dry dress rehearsal, which basically means a total dress rehearsal, including suit up, transporting to the pad, going up the elevators in the crew tower, down the crew access arm, and ingressing into the capsule, and basically doing a full rehearsal of launch day as if it were real, but no propellant involved. So that's why it's called a dry dress rehearsal, because there was no propellant involved. So technically, this is very similar to what they would have done on Thursday in terms of simulating that scrub and basically having the teams go back up into the crew tower and retrieve the astronauts from the capsule. So at this point in time, we are following along with the procedures for this unfortunate scrub, but everything continues to track nominally for this activity. Right now, for those that have recently joined, we had a hold called on the countdown at about T-minus 2.5 minutes. The crew had reported around T-minus 5 minutes, or excuse me, the ground teams the SpaceX ground teams had reported around T-minus 5 minutes an issue with the T-TEB, which is the basically the stuff that we use to ignite the engines on the first stage. So out of an abundance of caution, the teams called that hold at T-minus 2.5 minutes, and then proceeded into nominal off detanking or basically unloading the vehicle with all of its propellants. Given the fact that occurred at T-minus 2.5 minutes, the majority of the propellants were already on the vehicle.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Offloads are proceeding nominally, anticipating another half hour until closeout.
Understand, looking about a half hour to...
Teams indicating that we have about 30 minutes left of the propellant offloading. We heard Commander Steve Bowen sounding pretty unbothered by everything. Like I mentioned before, everything is written down in the procedure. They practiced this very similar egress procedure during Thursday night's dry dress rehearsal. So all in all, everything continuing nominally there for these next steps. As I mentioned before, we will see eventually the crew access arm swing back into the service position, and we will have the pad teams re-enter the pad area and basically enable the astronauts to egress. I also mentioned earlier that our backup launch opportunity is about the same time tomorrow, roughly 24 hours after our initial T0. Due to the fact that we were launching the crew that you see there on the right-hand side of your screen, they were headed to the International Space Station. As such, that is down to the very second in terms of catching up to the International Space Station when launching from Kennedy Space Center. So when it comes to crew launches, there's only one shot. And so therefore, due to that scrub that was called at T-minus 2.5 minutes, that was our only opportunity to launch today.
That's right, Kate. And as you mentioned, that scrub would be 24 hours. So we'll get to do this all over again. You mentioned the dry dress rehearsal. With a nominal offload of the fuel for this particular scrub, this is almost like a wet dress rehearsal, just taking it one step further. As you mentioned, for the dry dress, they did everything that we saw today, driving out to the pad, going up the elevators, and making their way into the vehicle, buckling up. The seats rotated, and they made their way far into the countdown, but before they started fueling the vehicle. Now they fueled the vehicle prior to launch, and again, we're following a scrub that occurred at about 2 minutes and 30 seconds prior to the T0 time. Due to tracking a ground issue with the T-TEB ignition fluid that's used on the engines to ignite them and fire the crew into orbit and eventually catching up with the International Space Station. But as they were continuing to look at this issue, decided to declare a scrub for today. That scrub is again a nominal scrub, so we'll be going through the scrub procedures, which include the detanking. They seem to be going a little faster than originally predicted. They called out to the crew about 50 minutes. Now we're inside 30 minutes from detanking the Falcon 9. That means the RP-1 refined kerosene and the liquid oxygen, that's the densified liquid oxygen that's on board, is being brought back into the lines that fuel them. So we'll be emptying those tanks. You can still see some of the oxygen, some of the gaseous oxygen billowing off the Falcon 9 rocket itself. So there is a little bit of fueling just to keep the crew safe. But you see, for the crew themselves, it's a very passive experience to launch scrub. All of these commands being issued by the teams on the ground. They'll continue to wait until and get status updates from the ground teams. Right now they are connected by umbilical. We did hear that as part of the normal countdown, the Falcon 9 transferred to internal power, but they re-enabled auxiliary power back into the vehicle. So through the detanking process, we're getting power from the ground and not relying on the batteries inside the vehicles, so we can continue to work through this process. Again, Steve Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al Neyadi, and Andrei Fedyaev on board. Crew Dragon Endeavour now passively waiting for the scrub process, detaking fuel first. This is going to be one of the lengthier processes. before the crew access arm swings back and allows the crew to egress or exit the Dragon vehicle and get back on the ground. We'll do the same thing again in about 24 hours, witnessing the same series of events, suiting up in the suit room before going down and making their way over to the pad via Tesla until they make their way up the launch tower, the elevators over there, and make their way back into the same vehicle. We'll continue to follow along and give you updates as we hear them. Right now, really it's just the detanking process, which is quite a lengthy process, so we'll continue to keep you updated there. That is still underway. That's one of the longer events that occur as part of a normal scrub. From left to right, Andrei Fedyaev, Woody Hoberg, Steve Bowen, Sultan Al Neyadi on board Crew Dragon Endeavour now. Now we'll continue to follow along through this process, but from here over in Hawthorne, we're now going to toss it back over to the Kennedy Space Center, where again we scrubbed at about 2 minutes 30 seconds to take us through and continue to give us updates along the scrub process. Daryl.
All right, thanks so much, Gary. Back here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Daryl Nail, and I'm with Crew 3 Commander, NASA astronaut Raja Chari. And it goes without saying, Raja, it looks like you're going to have to wait on seeing your first launch. As Gary mentioned, we had a scrub at right around 1:43 a.m. Eastern Time. Got down inside T-minus 10 minutes, and they started to notice an issue with what's called T-tab, and these are the chemicals that help ignite the Falcon 9 engines, all 9 of them. And as it turned out, it looks like there wasn't enough confidence in moving forward with the amount of T-tab that was there to light those engines, and so we had a scrub called. And so now, from the astronaut's perspective, Raja, you're sitting in there. First of all, tell me about what kind of reacts.
Yeah, so I think it's good and bad, right? The bad side is obviously, you're ready to go, been waiting for it, but I think what's really encouraging and what, especially we're appreciative as the astronauts is knowing that everyone's got our back and that safety is the paramount thing. So as much as everyone wants to go, the right thing to do is obviously, in this case, to scrub. And so I think that's really easy to remember when you're in the seat and when you're dealing with, as you go through the process of de-arming the launch escape system, all those steps just remind you like, oh yeah, the safety's got to be first. I think it's also kind of a good deal because it gets a free run through of all the events in the timeline. So now they've seen it all once, they have the wet dress, but now you've taken it all the way down to near launch and you get another run of that, another run through the procedures. We talked earlier in the night about sleep shifting, so they're already sleep shifted. That's why we do it that way, so that they're, you can continue and no earlier than tomorrow another launch opportunity. So I think that's kind of what's going through the mind right now. You heard earlier the call up from the core to get into 5.100, so that's the procedure they're running now. Earlier in the night they're using 4.100 is the procedure name, and that was the launch prep, and this is the scrub prep. And so as a rough rule of thumb, what they teach the crew is about as long as you were fueling, it'll take that long to defuel. So since we were pretty deep into the count, you would expect to take that amount of time to basically take all the fuel out of the rocket. So the big picture is the crew's going to stay there just like they were ready for launch with the visors down, completely restrained, because the rocket still has prop on board. So the launch escape system is still armed. So it is still a volatile machine.
There's propellant on board,
exactly. So they still, so we still have to treat it as if it's ready to go, as it is ready to go. And then once the prop is all off, then they can disarm the launch escape system, bring the crew access arm back out, and then egress the vehicle. So essentially what we saw earlier tonight, just run back in reverse. And then I think it's also a good example. You mentioned like inside T minus 10 minutes is when we started to see some ground chatter and know there was an issue. You didn't hear that on the loops to the crew. And one of the reasons is, we work a lot in training to figure out like, what do you tell the crew? What don't you tell the crew? But generally speaking, if there's nothing the crew can do about something, or, in this case, there's an action being worked, then maybe it would maybe potentially only confuse the situation to give them extraneous information. In this case, once they had actionable info, like, hey, we're going to scrub or we're looking at this, that's when they call it up, versus just peppering them with random pieces of information that may or may not be relevant. In today's case, it turned out to be relevant, but they let them know that once that was the case. But yeah, I think from the crew standpoint, this is something we, just about, honestly, our launch was the first time we ever had an event where nothing went wrong, because in all the sims you do, something generally goes wrong. That's the whole point. Right. So this is actually par for the course, that you're like, oh yeah, of course, of course something happened, because that's what always happens in the sims.
That's how you sim.
Yeah, that's how you sim. So I think it's unexpected, and with, I think we relearn this every time we launch a vehicle, whether it's Artemis, SpaceX Dragon, a Starliner. We always learn things, and you can never assume everything's going to go perfectly. So I don't think it surprises anyone. Not to say that they're not disappointed. There's still that.
That's probably the first.
The first thing is like,
right?
Oh man, but then like, oh, that's good.
Right.
They made the safe decision. But yeah, absolutely a little disappointed. But yeah, you're still going to get to go to space. We'll just maybe do it a day or two later.
And currently, according to SpaceX, when they initially made the announcement, it takes about 50 minutes to detank the rocket. And currently, we're right around a half hour left in that process. So we've gone about 20 minutes in detanking. As you mentioned, astronauts have to stay strapped in exactly where they are to wait it out as that propellant is detanked. And I found that you can kind of get a visual marker by what you see right here, right? You can see
some venting,
venting of the locks at the top, but then also just about as high as that condensation is coming off the rocket.
SpaceX with propellant offload update.
Now we'll get an update.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Our stage 2 LOX tank is offloaded. We're still tracking about another 25 to 30 minutes here. Last estimate may have been a little low.
SpaceX Dragon, copy. Thanks for the update.
So about halfway done.
About halfway, and you can see.
Yeah,
you're almost about halfway down.
I actually never noticed that before, but that's actually a really good insight.
And so now the astronauts are waiting in the capsule. SpaceX is looking at, and will look at after this procedure is complete, what's going on with the hardware. There is a launch opportunity tomorrow. And I want to emphasize this is an opportunity if the team decides that they can turn it around in 24 hours. And that would be with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. Again, tomorrow, well, this would be Tuesday, February 28th, with a T0 of 1:22 and 29 seconds a.m. There is a launch opportunity. If NASA and SpaceX decide to go forward with that, our coverage on NASA TV would start at 9:45 p.m., both on NASA TV and our streaming platforms. Also, from launch to dock, that transit would be about 33 and a half hours. So if they decide to launch on that day, docking would happen on March 1st at 10:04 Eastern Time. There'd be a rendezvous, docking, and welcoming ceremony coverage on NASA TV that would start at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. And I say all that, again, with the asterisk that is a decision that has yet to be made, whether or not they take that launch opportunity. There's going to be a time to look at this situation.
Right, and so like we heard that it was a situation with the T-tab, which is again sort of the, if you will, the igniter for the engines and making sure the fluid, there's enough fluid or sufficient fluid. So whatever the technical underlying of that problem that led to today, if that's something that can be resolved, and obviously that's something the teams will be diving into probably as soon as the prop is off the rocket. I'm sure they're going to be crawling all over it. That's one of the other logistical things that's happening here. So there's, once they start fueling the rocket as part of the countdown sequence and the crew armed the launch escape system, all the personnel around there also cleared out. And so right now there is no one really close to the rocket. So once the fuel is off the rocket and then the crew de-arms the LES, then people can approach again. So it does take some time for the vehicles and people and the closeout crew, just like it did to clear out the arm and prep it. They'll have to do the same thing to bring people back to the arm, re-prepare it to connect to the capsule. But again, it's actually in the long run kind of a good thing is when they do try this the second time, it means it'll go all the more smoother because they'll have got another rep of doing it. You mentioned the one thing having a longer time to rendezvous, the 33 hours. Actually, that's kind of another little maybe a positive silver lining out of this, because I know for us, for Crew 3, we really enjoyed our time in the capsule. You spend so much time training in Hawthorne, training in Houston, and there's something special, I think, about being in a small vehicle. Yes, it's cramped, so I wouldn't necessarily want to spend 2 weeks in there, but more than a few